reflecting back on your military career, what was the mentally hardest day of your career, and what did it take to get through that day?
So for me, probably P Company. Um, P Company, for those that don't know, is the selection for the Parachute Regiment. I did this 3 times in the space of 6 months. But I haven't heard of many people that have done that in a short space of time. So trying to get through that barrier of P Company and failing twice on the square and having to march off and stand on your own and not, on your own and not receiving that berry when all your mates have passed. That was probably the hardest part, certainly through training. And probably, the through my military career, if I'm completely honest.
So with the process like that, having to go through that multiple times, what did you learn and sort of implement the next time round?
Um, I suppose really was just that I had it in me. I had it in me deep down and I could push through. I did learn a lot from them experiences that when things did get tough, and B Company did get tough for me at 17, that I was able to kind of push through that barrier and I had more to give, if that makes sense. Do you know what I mean? I had another level that I could push through. I suffered numerous injuries as well. That didn't help, but a lot of it is kind of mind over matter, certainly with things like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so for people who aren't familiar with this at all, you mentioned P Company there. What does that process look like, and what is exactly asked of you?
So P Company's a test week, about week. It varies off the top of my head. I think it was about week 20 of the Parachute Regiment selection process. And it's a week of tests, 2 events a day designed to test you mentally and physically, ranging from a P Company 10 miler, which is 10 miles with 35 pound plus weapon over undulating ground in an hour 50. Sounds to probably a runner and go, oh yeah, but it's proper undulating. It's like tank tracks. And it's not slow. Um, so yeah, various events throughout the week as you go. And what people don't realize with P Company is your body's already breaking down by the time you get there because you've had 20 weeks of being absolutely hammered. There is an all arms P Company where other soldiers from other units can come and do like 6 weeks and they do P Company, but you're already kind of injury ridden and knackered, if you like, by the time you get there. So yeah, it's a cheeky process to say the least.
And just for our audience who, they may be brand new to this world, can you explain what the Paratroop Regiment is and what sort of scenario they would be used in then?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously dating back to the Second World War, they were created as shock troops was the quickest and most effective way of getting mass troops on the ground by aircraft parachuting out behind enemy lines. Um, Obviously, as years have gone by, there's kind of less need for that mass drop of troops. So we became more sort of driven in, like 16 Air Assault Brigade, we became in where we were delivered by helicopter into war zones, shock troops, self-sufficient troops. Um, Obviously, people think there's just the paratrooper part or the parachuting part to that, but the training's extensive. The training's harder than the normal infantry. I'll get a lot of criticism for that. There's always a lot of people who go, no, it's harder, it's longer. And that's what creates the paratrooper is the whole process. The actual parachuting part, the 4 weeks at the end, is like a holiday camp. You go to RAF Bryce Norton, you see how the other half live with the lobsters and hotels, and stuff like that. So it's just a process, an extended process. You're an infantry soldier, but you are different and sort of complex in your role, if that makes sense.
And what was it about the Paratroop Regiment? Why did you gravitate towards that?
It's a good question, Lewis. It's a good question. I still don't know to this day, if I'm completely honest. I did a week when I was 15. I did a week with the Worcestershire Foresters, which are my local unit in Nottingham. They're now like the Mercians, I believe they are now, or the Rifles. I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, I did a week with them at 15, and I did really well. And they wanted me to join them. So up until I got like best over, I've got a tankard somewhere still where I got best overall student out of about 80 15-year-olds. Quite proud at the time of that. Um, And yeah, I was always going for my local regiment. And then my best mate, who went on to Special Forces, um, he was like, "Why don't we join this unit called the Paras?" And I was like, "Oh, well, what do they do?" And he was like, "Well, pretty much the same. They just jump out of planes." So I was totally, really, I know a bit about them, but not a lot, but totally oblivious, really. So I'd mentioned it to my parents and my uncles, and they were like, I had some knee issues back then as well. And they were like, "You won't get through the training." And that was almost the spur me on moment. When your dad turns around, I think it was tough love. I think, he meant it in a way that if he tells me that I can't do it, I'm going to prove him wrong. So yeah, we kind of ended up joining up to the Parachute Regiment, not really knowing a great deal about them. But it was a shock to the system, Lewis. I'm not going to lie to you.
What does that training look like, start to finish? How long is that process?
So it's about 28 weeks, depending on if you get back squatted through injury. Obviously, you get back squatted to a platoon behind, and then you kind of, you go through the tests again if you fail, which has happened to me. Um, but yeah, it starts off with a basic training. I think it's about 11 or 12 weeks basic training. And then you move on to your phase two training. It's all at Catterick now, which is obviously a big garrison town, but it's basically, yeah, all at Catterick. And it's just building you up, fitness, soldiering. Um, and you do genuinely leave there a different person, a completely different person. I went in as a boy at 17, and I know it sounds corny, but I came out a fully trained paratrooper and a man, I know that does sound a bit corny, but it's the truth. It developed me. And I always say those lessons and stuff I've learned back then have guided me through every single career path that I've done to date, and they still do now.
What are some of the sort of attributes or traits or lessons that you've taken from, your career in the military and applied elsewhere in your life? What sticks with you?
I think the mental robustness and that ability to kind of push through when times are hard, that resilience of being saying, right, I know it's tough, but I've been in a lot tougher places, going through training on some of the exercises that we went on and on some of the operations. So I'd probably say that resilience to know that you've got more in the tank. And I don't think I've ever been tested, probably with a bit of boxing, with fitness, but I've never been tested like that, like I was back then as a 17-year-old. And like I say, that set me up moving forward with that resilience to know that I've got that reserve, whether it's fitness, whether when personal life's tough, job's hard, you've got that kind of next step or next level or gear, if you like.
So going back to when you're a young lad, why the military at all? What were you looking for? Was it, what was the motivation? Was it maybe a love of your country? Were you looking for adrenaline? What was the main driver at a young age?
I suppose I didn't really know what to do. I was a bit lost at that age, and I was in a lot of trouble. I've talked about this extensively before, but I was in a lot of trouble. I had a great upbringing up until a point, and then some incidents happened when I was about 8 that I've not even addressed myself yet. Um, but then, as a result of that, I became quite unruly, quite an angry kid, an angry teenager. Um, Drinking at a young age, taking drugs at a young age. Um, Only sort of, kind of usual recreational stuff, but this led on to fighting and violence. And I used to get involved we used to go into Nottingham and fight every weekend with someone, and it got ridiculous to the point when I was 17, well, 16, I believe, I got glassed in the face, ended up having about 19 stitches, broken nose, fractured jaw, and bits and bobs. And it was at that point my dad took me to one side. I say took me to one side, dragged me to one side, and basically said, "If you carry on down this route, you will get arrested." I'd have been arrested a couple of times at that point, and he was like, "You will end up going to prison, and that'll be you." So he was like, "Why don't you think about the army?" So I was a bit like, right, options, no qualifications whatsoever from school, no GCSEs, no nothing. I'm not a massive believer in the school system, but that's for another time. But I kind of, yeah, that was the main. I was bored as well with kind of the thought of doing a civilian job. Not that there's anything wrong, but for me personally, it wasn't going to something that was going to occupy me or keep me occupied, interested long enough. And the military gave me that purpose, that interest, and that kind of ultimate passion, really.
Mm. Was you mentioned purpose? Was that something that was important to you throughout your career? Because I know, I've spoken to a couple of military guys, and some are very purpose driven. They always remind themselves the reason why they're there, what they're fighting for. Whereas others, they're a little bit more ambivalent towards the politics and the purpose behind it, and maybe there for more personal reasons.
Yeah, I'd say it's a difficult one. Like everything I've ever done within the military, I believe we were doing for good and it was a good purpose. Now, if the government probably have other motives, which I'm sure they do, but for us on the ground on certain operations, it was always about doing good and seeing bad stuff happen and preventing it. So having that purpose that you were doing good was probably what drove a lot of us. I think a lot of people will probably relate to that have served in the military. Now, I'm not going to say every single conflict without getting too political that we've been involved in was for the right reasons, and I'm sure you're more than aware of which ones I'm talking about. But for Sierra Leone, for example, we saw atrocities firsthand and witnessed the aftermath, and we drove out, as part of not me personally, but subsequent operations and stuff, drove the West Side Boys and stopped a genocide. So that sort of purpose, I think, is what doing good. And that's followed me throughout my life. I've always wanted to do good and have a purpose that, helping people really.
So thinking back to that sort of troubled lad who first joined the military, what did that environment give him that was beneficial to where he was at in life? Was it a sense of routine? Was it a sense of discipline? Was it the camaraderie? What did you get the most out of that being in that environment at that age?
Probably all of the above, I'd probably say, structure, routine, discipline, self-reliance. You go in there not knowing how to tie your shoelaces practically to coming out and then being a self-efficient kind of paratrooper that can live in shitholes around the world. So yeah, it kind of all those things, teamwork, working with different people. What's unique, I think, about the Parachute Regiment as well is because we recruit from worldwide. We have a lot of Fijians, we have Australians, South Africans, a lot of the Commonwealth countries. Um, UK wide, Scottish, Welsh, you name it. We have multiple people from all walks of life. It creates a bond. And I believe, rightly or wrongly, that's why the Brotherhood is so strong. That's why you see people with Power Edge tattoos. That's why people have the berry up in the background. And it's just that Brotherhood is almost cult like. So it gave me that sense of, I don't know, camaraderie, I'd probably say.
And that sort of brotherhood, that camaraderie, what does that give you when it gets tough? Are there moments or situations throughout your military career where you can really think that that sense of brotherhood, that camaraderie carried you through some really difficult times?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Multiple exercise. When you think you're in shit state because you're tired or your feet are wet or you're cold, there's always someone that you will look to, either that's on the complete opposite who's telling you to get a grip, or there's always someone that's in a much worse state. So yeah, and there'll always be someone that will grab you and come on, you dickhead, stop being a knob, pick yourself up. And it's that almost kind of tough love again. But yeah, like multiple times when working, because you've got people of different abilities, different strengths, different weaknesses, there's always someone that can help you compare to, or does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. So with the parachute regiment specifically, what are the skills, attributes, traits that would make an elite paratrooper?
The ability to get naked in a pub, definitely, when naked bar shouted, drink a lot. That's probably good at fighting, those sort of things. No, joking aside, just obviously physical fitness is a big thing. Now, you will get a lot of other units saying we eat crayons. I get that. And there's a lack of intelligence. I always argue kind of against that because, quite simply, academically, you're probably right. A lot of paratroopers probably not academically skilled, qualified when it comes to GCSEs, A levels, degrees, that sort of thing. However, a massive percentage go on to become special forces. So you cannot be a special forces soldier and be thick as mince. You just can't. The big recruitment pool from the parachute regiment go, like I said, go into special forces. you just have skills and stuff. And don't get me wrong, there are some really thick paratroopers as well. I've encountered quite a few. I'd probably fall into that bracket, to be honest, Lewis. No, but it is, yeah, it's kind of, yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. Another thing as well, I wonder, is there, or there seems to be a bit of a, not a fighting, but a sort of combat sports culture within the Paratroop Regiment. I know, being from Wales, being around here, there was a UFC fighter called Jack Marshman. He was a former paratrooper, and yeah, really, really proud of that, and would always reference that in interviews and everything. In fact, I interviewed him a couple of times in the past, and he'd always refer to that. Was there that sort of fighting culture and combat sports, and why do you think that was?
I know Jack. I've had Jack on the
Ah,
podcast
brilliant.
myself. Yeah, he's a cracking bloke. It's just that I think, excuse me, it's just that wanting to be that drive that you kind of taught, wanting to be better. A free para boxing team were army champions for about 11 years, I believe, unbeaten. Um, and then if it wasn't, free para, it was two para, or, another unit dodged in there somewhere or mixed in there. But it was just that competitive edge. I look back now, I'm a different person now. I'm not that same person as I was as a 17-year-old. I was very much, kind of took in by the cult thing. And there's an element of that left, but it's not a bad thing when you're trying to create a driven, physically fit paratrooper. You belong to something, and it is almost cult like. And that's taken into everything: sports, social, obviously into conflicts, operations. It's that, I don't know, it's that drive of wanting to be better than the rest of the armed forces. And I don't think that's bad. I talked about it a few times about the rivalry. I think the rivalry within the British Army sets the British Army apart from the rest of the world. Every unit is competing to be better than the other. And that's why our bond with the Royal Marines, love or hate them, our love-hate relationship with the Royal Marines is because we're striving to be better than each other. If there wasn't the paras or there wasn't the Marines, the other probably wouldn't be as good. And I will get some criticism for that, but we strive to be better than them, which we are, and they strive to be better than us, which they think they are. So again, I have a lot of Royal Marine friends as well, and I give them shit on a day-to-day basis.
No, that makes sense. So, like, I think on the surface, people might think that that rivalry is a disjointed thing, but as you put it there, it's more of a striving for excellence thing. So it can really only be a net positive to have that sort of rivalry.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, amazing. Well, I suppose you've done a little bit of boxing yourself, right?
With the loosest of possible terms, yeah.
So what's your experience been like in the ring, just out of interest, or from what you've done?
Now, for anyone watching, I've never claimed to be a great boxer.
No.
I'm not. I did a bit in the military, sort of company level. I did a bit as a kid, and I mean messing around as a kid.
Yeah.
I've always been a boxing fan. I have fond memories of sitting watching boxing with my dad or listening to Mike Tyson v Frank Bruno. Passion for boxing, man. And I got to about 30, I don't know, 33, and I was working anti-piracy, so I was away a lot. I was training 3 times a day on the ship, running pull-ups, press-up circuits in the kind of African sun, if you like, in the Indian Ocean. So I was fit as a fiddle. And while I was back on a month off, I signed up for a white collar
Mm.
at 33. And everyone was going, "You're bonkers. You've never done that sort of stuff. You've never fought." And I was like, well, you know, I milled 5 times when I came through P Company, twice the first P Company, twice the second P Company, and once. And I basically annihilated 4 people. And then I got a bit too big for my boots, come up against the big scouse of the 5th time round, and he about knocked my block off. I was lucky to get a draw. So lessons learned there. Don't get too cocky. So I've always known I can hit hard. Um, and I mean, I wasn't the fittest paratrooper. I wasn't the best paratrooper. I was kind of middle of the road. I struggled on some fitness stuff. And when I got out, I really got into fitness, CrossFit, boxing, running, you name it. Um, so I just got my fitness levels up to ridiculous levels. Um, so yeah, I just kind of went in for this white collar fight, fought a massive 6'6" black lad, who was probably about 12 years younger than me. Had about 5 or 6 fights. and I went in there with a milling sort of attitude and just didn't stop punching. And it was good. We got fight of the night, and that was my introduction to kind of boxing. And then from there, I obviously got in the fire service, fought for the fire service, and then followed it through on the unlicensed scene. And like I say, if you watch me box, I am very, very not pretty when it comes to boxing. I'm not a technical fighter. I spar a lot better than I do fight. I spar quite technical, but then when I get in a ring, I don't lose my temper, but I get drawn into a bit of a scrap, and I like that. Not anymore. I'm too old, but I basically, yeah, I just had a bit of a run at it, and I thought, well, I've started it now, and I carried it on, and I fought for the last time last year at 44 for the fire service. Had about 15, 16 fights, only lost once, to a guy that went on to become ranked 18th in the UK as a pro. So I only lost the points in him. I never got stopped. So yeah, I just at the unlicensed level with heavyweight, if you're fit, um, you tend to do all right because people tend to be bigger lads, a bit overweight, if you like, and if they don't knock you out in the first 30 seconds, then they're breathing out their arse. So I just trained to be fitter than everyone else, and it worked. And that's how come I did all right. Got a couple of local belts and stuff like that, but it's nothing to write home about. I just enjoyed a good tear up.
Love it. And you had that base level of fitness, right? You were certainly very fit. And for people watching, I think people underestimate how fit military guys need to be. I know they might watch those shows on TV like modeled off a selection course, and they think, yeah, I could probably manage a couple of runs like that. But how fit do you really need to be?
Oh, it's bonkers, and it's not conventionally fit. You'll look at some people in the military with bellies that have got a bit of a gut on them, and you think, wow, they're not fit. And then they'll stick a Bergen on the back and they'll go for 10, 15 miles at a ridiculous pace. It's not about how you kind of look. So look, I rightly or wrongly, in my opinion, I've heard this mentioned a few times. By the time you finish training and turn up in a battalion, you're up there kind of professional athlete standard, certainly coming out of the Parachute Regiment. And that kind of, I was always a big lad. I mean, I came through depot at 80, about 88, 90 kilo at 17. So I've always been big. So I struggled a bit with the running. Um, but, Bergen on, I was all right. Anything cardio, circuits or assault course, steeplechasers, I was absolutely fine. I just struggled with the long runs because I'm a big lad. But certainly kind of, yeah, that's gone on. I actually got fitter when I was out because I pushed it even more. In the military, you do a training regime that they put to you, and it doesn't suit everyone. So some people I might have said, well, he wasn't very fit because I wasn't a runner. I couldn't keep up with a 10-stone platoon commander. But, you know, after when I came out, I knew what worked for me. So I got even fitter when I come out, and probably about sort of early 30s, 32, 33. I had my VO2 max done, and it was about 68 or 69 for a VO2 max. Puts you on par with
Yeah, that's
sort
right.
of professional footballers or higher. So, but not anymore. It's about 4 now, my VO2 max. And, I need an oxygen tank just to get upstairs.
Love it.
No,
Love it. Well, the training is one thing. Obviously, we know you have to be super fit for the training, but when you translate that into real world scenario, can you think of a time throughout your career where we talked earlier about where you've been mentally pushed to the max, but can you remember a time in your military career where you've been physically pushed to the max?
it will be boxing,
Hmm.
without a doubt. Anything I've done, now there'll be people that watch boxing. And I was one of them for years that watched it and thought, oh, it can't be that hard. It wasn't still to the start of going to a gym and got a proper trainer and realized I was like, what are the 4 buckets in the corner or the big black bins for? And they're like, oh, they're for vomiting in. And I was a bit like, okay, I'd been pushed hard in the parachute regiment, don't get me wrong, to the point of vomiting. But having done boxing and being absolutely annihilated by a boxing coach. And that was for 3, 4 round fights. So going in that boxing ring when the adrenaline takes over. And I have turned up for fights. I turned up for one. I got offered one on a Wednesday once in Cumbria. And then I drove, and this was on the Sunday I was going to fight. I had no training. I hadn't trained for about 6 months. And I thought, well, it was about 300 quid or something like that. And I was like, well, yeah, I'll go and do it. And I turned up and they changed my opponent at the last minute. And I ended up fighting the second professional rugby player that I fought in my career, boxing career, loose terms. And I ended up fighting a former sort of pro rugby player that had been training for about 18 weeks. So we went, and that was when I really had to dig deep because I wasn't fit enough. And I'd say them sort of scenarios are when you think, right, I've got to really dig deep, and you find something about yourself. It's a lonely place in a boxing ring. And like I said, I don't claim to be any great boxer. I had a bit of a run of it on the unlicensed scene. You know what I mean? I'd have got undone by anyone that was at any sort of pro level, without a doubt.
Love it. Circling back then, once you passed, and you were in the Parachute Regiment, what were your first memories of since you joined the Parachute Regiment? What was that first sort of tour like? What was that first memory like?
Well, I'd probably say turn up at Aldershot, 1998. Sort of scary, horrible building, down in sort of Aldershot, the barracks down there. And just meeting horrible, scary paratroopers. There were still paratroopers in from the Falklands, big, horrible creatures. And it was just as an 18-year-old, you're like, I am really in a man's world here. And being a bit thinking, bit of imposter syndrome, thinking, should I be here? But you're doing the right, you're doing the Maroon Berry, you were there. But yeah, I wasn't in Aldershot too long before we went on a first stop. We got rushed through the end of training. I had no real pass out as such, rushed straight down. And then I think I was there about a week, and then we started Northern Ireland training for a Northern Ireland tour. So within 3 or 4 months of being down in Aldershot and getting to know, I was out in Northern Ireland for my first tour, sort of mid to late 1998, I believe. If my memory serves you right, though, people will know better than me. I forgot a lot. I forgot more than most people know, if that's well, for the better word. But yeah, so I ended up on that first Northern Ireland tour, and you know, a rude awakening again. Back still then, late 90s, I think 97, there was some soldiers shot and killed in Northern Ireland. So the threat was still very, very real. Great tours for soldiering, honing your skills, becoming a paratrooper. That's where the real kind of stuff starts to take shape and starts to create the paratrooper, as it were. So yeah, that patrolling and navigating and all that kind of good stuff in Northern Ireland was what makes you, I think, good at soldiering. Them early tours for me certainly honed me in as a seasoned paratrooper, if you like.
Just for context for people then who may not be aware, Northern Ireland, what exactly was the situation? What were you tasked with during that tour?
So you've got to, without getting political, there was sort of terrorist organizations and people for one side, one people, obviously two sides as they are. And basically we were there to kind of keep peace, if you like. I suppose peacekeeping, but there was still people cutting around, attacking British soldiers, carrying out atrocities as such. So yeah, we were just tasked with patrolling around certain areas of Northern Ireland and kind of keep show of presence, really, the troops on the ground there to keep the peace. Um, it seems a bit weird now looking back, having been subsequently on to for different conflicts in like deserts and stuff. It feels like a different country because you are in a different country. But when you're in Northern Ireland, it's like patrolling around any UK city.
Yeah.
So it's hard to kind of stay switched on because you're walking past, for example, like a co-op, or it's bizarre, and you're armed, you've got a rifle and you're carrying ammunition and you're patrolling around the streets and doing all this stuff, and people are genuinely wanting to shoot and kill you. So it's very, very hard to stay switched on and, not get complacent in them environments.
Yeah, so you mentioned there it's almost like a familiar environment, I guess. But what other tours, what other locations, what other environments were you in during your career?
So I did 3 tours of Northern Ireland throughout the 7 years I was in. We went to Sierra Leone in 2000 when that kicked off. Um, Macedonia we did as part of disarming the rebels, and then I was on one of the very first, if not the first, Afghanistan tour in Kabul. So I'm always open about the tours and the time I did. It was busy, 6 operational tours in 7 years. I went to Canada and Belize as well, fitted in, plus multiple exercises. So it was a very, very busy period for training and operations, but they weren't like anything like the Southern Afghanistan tours that the guys went on 2006 onwards, where they were involved in, kind of proper contacts and stuff like that. There was always the threat. Sierra Leone, there was a big threat. And even in Afghanistan, there was some minor skirmishes with people. I think our patrols and snipers end up getting in a contact and stuff. Multiple standoffs with police in dark alleys because they didn't know who you were. And so that, the threat was there. But as far as kinetic stuff, not a massive amount. I'm always dead straightforward about that. I don't want to claim I did anything in the military that was spectacular. It wasn't. I did 6 operational tours, but fairly uneventful on that sort of aspect.
Mm. Other than the events, then, what was the most challenging environment?
Uh, Probably Sierra Leone. Great little operation. I always, I was on the piss in Tenerife with my best mate that's now gone on to SF and that. And I just landed. I was already out there about 4 days longer than I should have been. We got pissed at the airport, missed a flight. And I end up kind of deciding, right, there's only 3 spots. The 2 lads that we met plus my best mate, there was 3 spots on a flight. Someone had to stay behind. I was like, I'll stay. Ended up sleeping on someone's couch for 4 days, just going on the piss and that. And then when I got back, I was obviously a bit worse for wear after 10 days in Tenerife, as you can imagine, as a 19-year-old. And then I got back and my dad was like, oh my God, the army's been ringing back when the mobiles were the thing back then. You've got to go back. You've been called up to something. They won't tell me what. And it was like wacky races trying to get back to Colchester. And within probably 24, 36 hours of being on the piss in Tenerife, I was patrolling around Freetown in Sierra Leone with a hangover from hell. You know what I mean? Not ideal, Lewis, not ideal at all.
No. I viewed you on your, I think on your podcast. I viewed you say at times throughout your life you felt like a cat with 9 lives. What are some of the moments over the course of your life, looking back, that you think you tested that limit a little bit, and you think that was a bit too close to call?
Well, I'd say mainly the stuff that I saw as far as kinetic stuff, whereas after, so I decided in 2004 that I was going to go and be a mercenary. I like the glamour and the glitz. I knew nothing really about it. I was lucky enough to get a heads up off people I knew that had sort of from SF and a few lads that were out there. It wasn't common knowledge. So I decided to sign off and go and do that. And I was very fortunate to go out and do that. So that's mainly where a lot of incidents that are involved in where I kind of dodged bullets, not literally speaking, but in some cases, pretty much. I kind of we used to, one of the first company I worked for, I was there 7 days and then I chinned an Australian SAS bloke, ex-Australian SAS bloke, and got sacked. Now that's not ideal. So I was still quite angry. Still, he was a dick. In my defense, he was a dick and a bit of a bully. Don't like that sort of thing. It's not my style. So yeah, he gave me some shit. So I ended up filling him in and got sacked. So it took me a little bit of time to get back out there with a different company. So I landed out there with a particular company, and part of our role was setting up the company because it was like really in its infancy. So I was training local nationals, first aid, weapons, tactics, that sort of thing, to go on the better ones to be part of the close protection teams. The not so good to do the static guarding and the man guarding and stuff like that. So yeah, we had to go every day and sign him in at the Iraqi checkpoint. So you had an Iraqi checkpoint that went into the green zone, and then maybe 100, 200 meters back, you had a US checkpoint. So we always had to go to the Iraqi checkpoint because, they wouldn't be allowed in. And on the particular day, it was my turn to go and sign him in. For whatever reason, the Iraqis had let them through. So they come through to the US call sign checkpoint. Where I was signing him in. And at that point, a vehicle-borne IED, a car bomb, hit the outer checkpoint and detonated, blew us off our feet, killed about 17 people. Any other day, I would have been right there and probably dead or, severely injured. So that was my first kind of instant think, fucking hell, you are lucky. Right place, wrong time, or whichever way you want to look at it. And that continued throughout. I'd swapped drivers on one particular day just because I always drove the rear vehicle. And he was like, this was on a different contract, different company. And I swapped drivers. And I ended up driving a different vehicle or even maybe getting the day off. I can't remember. But they went out and he got a armor piercing RKG-3 grenade thrown at his vehicle, blew the door off and fragged him straight through his legs. And that would have been me. Like I say, and this continued throughout. Now I'm no longer in any sort of profession that's dangerous. I've obviously recently left the fire service and stuff like that. But yeah, there was multiple times where I've been, and the final one really, it's not even that much of a big deal. I was involved in quite a nasty ambush Boxing Day 2008. I was on a contract that was working for kind of US intelligence. No one wanted to go on it. Only 3 Land Cruisers. So you had like a team of 12, 3 Land Cruisers, one had a camera on. And it was filming basically every street and road and MSR in the Baghdad area. We were going into places in Baghdad, in Sadr City, where no Westerner had ever probably been before, just mapping out these streets of film at 30 mile an hour. Now, anyone that knows from the close protection in the Iraq days that the most dangerous place you can be is on the roads in Iraq. So we were out 8-9 hours a day driving around, and we got contacted Boxing Day. We literally drove into a marketplace, and I went, it's a bit quiet, and we got opened up on multiple sort of firing points. My Land Cruiser took armored Land Cruiser took multiple hits. Matt at the back opened up with his M4, which is rifle, got a stoppage, and then switched to like a Minimi. And he ended up shooting and I think killing or injuring 4 gunmen that were poking out around the corner of a building. And we drove out of it somehow because it was a complex ambush and it should have, but we drove out of it. But the final, the last incident was we were driving down a street and someone threw one of those stick grenades at the vehicle that I was driving, and it bounced off the door and never detonated. And we rocked up into the camp. We saw a US call sign as they were pulling out, spoke to them and said, look, we've just been involved in an incident. They threw a grenade at us. Be careful when you drive up there. They were like, yep, thanks for the heads up. And they went and detonated it and blew it up in place. And that evening, while we were eating, they came over to us and were like, fucking hell, you want to put the lottery on, you lot, because there is no reason why it shouldn't have detonated. The pin were pulled, should have blown up, should have took your door off, should have fragged you, should have killed you. And it never did. So that was 2010. And by that point, I'd done it for 6 years on and off. And I was a bit like, you know what? There's got to be a bit more to life than this. I want to change. I've had my luck. I'll go and do something different. So yeah, I stepped away, and at that sort of around the same time my little boy was born. He was early, so I went home and I never went back to Iraq after that.
Wow. In a scenario like you were describing there, where you are in a very precarious position, you're in a firefight, when you're faced with immediate danger, do you have time to sort of like reflect on the situation you're in, or do you go into just autopilot mode?
I think it autopilot a little bit, and again, without sounding corny, you kind of that's why you trained it the way you are.
Yeah.
And I'll probably come on to that with later careers. You're trained to that sort of level when it comes to weapons, repeated drills on weapons. Okay, so you can literally carry out the drills when you're not thinking about it, so you can focus on other things. So yeah, there's an element of training. And I'm not going to pretend and sit here and give it some sort of gung ho. Yeah, I was cool I wasn't. Everyone was shitting himself.
Yeah.
If you're not shitting yourself, you're either psychotic or you're lying. So yeah, there's an element of panic, but it's a controlled panic. You're moving with a sense of urgency. The adrenaline kicks in, and to a certain extent, I'd like to think training, takes over. Now, again, I don't want to claim that I did shitloads of stuff. There are people out there that have spent years and years out there and have been involved in massive incidents. I was lucky enough to work out there. I was involved in quite a few incidents, more than some, not as many as others. Um, and lucky enough, I came away unscathed. But again, I think that training element took over and carries you through when things get real.
You seem quite humble about and careful about what you're saying, and saying, like you saying, I don't want to claim to. You seem quite protective of that, which, and of course, you have obviously a lot of respect for the profession. So, and that's really clear for everyone to see. So, with that in mind, for someone like you, how does it sort of feel when you view instances of stolen valor? Because it seems like this is quite important to you.
Yeah, it is. It is. I hate that. Um, and like I say, there'll be people who watch this go, well, you only did 7 years. Yeah, I did 7 years, decided to try. But you earn that berry, you earn them medals that, that are in the background there. Look, well, no, I don't know where they've gone. Yeah. But the kind of, you earn that. And, I've lost a lot of friends over the years, not only to the conflicts, places like Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and places like that, but also afterwards to the mental health struggles that comes with dealing with stuff like that. So for someone to pop on a berry and a set of medals he's bought on eBay, I find it massively disrespectful. I do. For a long time, I used to call people out about it. It still annoys me, but I think I, for the people that do that, I think there's something wrong with them. It's their character, or they've got the issue. So I don't like to call people out about it anymore, because I don't know what's going off behind, in their brains. I don't know what stuff they face. But at the same time, I think, remembrance is a great time that you see it, it's there right in your face. People come and a lot get away with it. Quite recently, there's been that guy that paraded on as an admiral. And he was, people were clapping him and thanking him for his service. And he was going, oh, yeah. And he was lapping it up. And that's a character trait, or that's like narcissism, or it's something, but it's not right. And I think now, I could be mistaken, but I think there might be a law that says it's classed, because for years in America it's classed as stolen valor. It's a criminal offence. I believe it might be a criminal offence here now. Well, I hope it is. It should be.
Yeah, because I suppose it's the way you do it as well, because there's so much incentive, and so much you can gain out of it. I mean, financially as well. There's a guy in America, he's super famous, ex-military guy, and there was recently a bit of a thing about him, because someone went through the books he'd written and sort of pointed out how it would be impossible that he was in some of the missions that he claimed to be in. So there is a lot of incentive. If you can claim that you were part of these sort of legendary operations, you can go away, write books, and appear in interviews, and you stand a lot to gain a lot out of it.
Oh, absolutely. Of course you do. Yeah. And, unless people, now because I've not got a massive following, not like you, Lewis, with your following. I'm getting there though. But like, I have quite a big following now, predominantly ex-military, and veterans and stuff like that. So for me to come on here and claim I've done stuff that I haven't, there will be someone, the world's a small place. People will know and work with you and go, hold on a minute, that doesn't add up. Now there'll be dates and times that I've got wrong. I'm 45 now and I've been smacked in the face shitloads of times. So excuse me if I get timelines or dates wrong, but everything I've done, I don't try and big it up. It is kind of, you know, to the best of my knowledge, or how I remember it. I think that one with the RKG3, I remember that I thought I was driving, and I was, but I forgot that obviously the driving's on the other side of the vehicle, obviously like American, isn't it?
Hmm.
So I was a bit like, the stick grenade hit my door. It actually hit the passenger door, but I was driving. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
got that. And the lad that were in the vehicle but pointed it out to me jokingly. I went, I think you'll find you was driving. I was like, oh, yeah, I was. Yeah. So there's little bits like that. But, the stories are largely pretty much accurate to the best of my knowledge. But I don't know. It's a weird old thing. And yeah, it's a weird thing. I don't get it, but each to their own, innit?
Just before I move on from your military career, one thing I'd love to ask you, because all the military guests I've had on the show, whether they're British or American, we like to ask this question, and the audience love to debate it. Do you think that the British military are the best in the world?
Absolutely.
Mm.
No, but like, look, I've worked with foreign armies. I did some stuff after the Iraq with the anti-piracy, where I worked with some great lads from the French Foreign Legion.
Mm.
Different nationalities. I worked with a guy. He won't mind me saying his name, Yusuf from Morocco. Absolutely incredible. 20 odd years in the French Foreign Legion, involved in some absolutely crazy stuff. Absolutely sounds switched on. Someone you want outside of him outside of you in a contact. Um, so yeah, it's. I forgot the question now, Lewis. That's what my brain does.
No, we're just talking about, are the British the best in the world?
Yeah. So you will get fragments from other units that are switched on. It's like other British Army units. For a long time, you're led to believe that the Parachute Regiment are the best thing since sliced bread. And I believe as a unit, they have that cut above the rest. Again, I will get criticism. But what working in the private security industry sector did for me was open my eyes a little bit to working with different units and different armies. I worked with quite a few US Marines, a guy called Jake that I had on the podcast, ex-US Marine, fought in Fallujah. Absolutely incredible bloke, top bloke, incredible soldier. Yet, you come across, I've witnessed firsthand some of the tactics of some of the other US soldiers, and I've been a little bit like, yeah, that's not. I witnessed a lot of negligent discharges when queuing up for the DFACs and the scoff houses to get your dinner. And they'll just unload into the thing and then let off a round by mistake. That used to happen almost daily. Whereas in the British Army, if you do that, that is a big. I never had one in the whole time I've worked with any weapons, but it happens. Sometimes it does happen by accident, but this was a common occurrence. So I think, as far as discipline, how our military is with that sort of thing, the training, our sense of humor, I think that's what strives to make us. And you hear lots of Delta boys talking on various US podcasts about working with our special forces and stuff like that, and they will say, those guys know their shit. So I believe we have the best special forces in the world. I believe we have the best parachute regiment in the world, and I believe we have the as a whole. To answer your question, I believe we are the best in the world, but I'm bound to be a little bit biased, just a little bit.
Well, I always tell this story when I ask this question, but on this show we had on a 4-star military general from the US called General Stanley McChrystal. He's responsible for the capture of Saddam Hussein, and he worked with a lot of British units. He did a lot of crossover work and training with them, and he said that he will openly admit that he thinks the British are the best in the world, and he puts that down to the sort of meritocracy that exists within the British forces. So that in America, it's very hierarchical. It's I'm this rank, you're that rank. You listen to me, I tell you what to do. Whereas he said when he was working with some of the British guys, he had these guys that were, well, that would be far, far below him in the sort of hierarchy, coming up to him and calling him General Stan and giving him these ideas. And he said it wasn't disrespectful, but he said the British had this thing where it didn't matter what rank you were, it was who had the best input, who had the right ideas.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Because again, and I think I've said this quite a lot in recent professions as well, which we'll probably come on to, but incompetency when it comes to leadership is dangerous, obviously, for obvious reasons. But what's up there with that incompetency is people that are above you that are not willing to take sort of ideas and options from other people in the team. Everyone's got that. You may have seen something that they've not. So as a good leader, one of them good leadership qualities would be the ability to take information from people that are a lesser rank. And I have witnessed that firsthand, saying, well, what the fuck do you know? You're just a Tom, I'm a corporal. And then it's been the right decision. They've never admitted it, but it's like, well, yeah, just listen to the people that are around you. It's a team for a reason. So I get that. And it is, largely within the British Army, you come up with an idea and a corporal will either go, fuck off that shit, or he'll go, yeah, Sam, do you know what I mean? That's not a bad idea. Why don't we go left down that ravine, do that, blah, blah, blah. And that I've carried that on into sort of the fire service and stuff, which will, like I said, we'll probably come on to. But yeah, I believe that ability to take on, ideas from people that are a lesser rank. Just because you're a lesser rank doesn't mean you've not got as much experience.
No, definitely. And you touched on it there when you left the military career behind. Some of the other work you went on, you did some anti-piracy stuff, right? Some security.
Yeah, I did. I did sort of 3 years doing the anti-piracy stuff off the coast of Somalia. Again, it was a lot better rotation instead of the whole 8 weeks on, sort of 3, 4 weeks off that you did in Iraq. You could work it a month on, a month off. So it was brilliant. So you go take a ship or two ships. You could stay out there longer if you wanted to, or you could bounce back home. So it gave me more flexibility with a young family, and it was surprisingly safe. I say safer, less kind of, I suppose, less engagement with a potential threat, as it were. So obviously, the threat was all around you in Iraq. When you were doing anti-piracy, the ocean's a big place. You didn't always encounter. I don't want to think it was like some sort of, one-eyed Willy kind of Goonie sketch with pirate ships sailing around and pirates everywhere. It wasn't. You'd encounter them. I encountered them probably a handful of times, half a dozen times while I were working anti-piracy in 3 years. Um, but the first 6 or 5 or 6, or probably a few more, I can't remember now, trips that I did, we didn't have weapons. We had to have spears, petrol bombs, and fortify the ship. So I've done quite a few. Phil Campion talks about this because he was out there about the same time as I was. I didn't meet him out there, but when I chatted on his podcast about it, yeah, you just had to get the engineer to make your Molotov cocktails and stuff. And I used to sit there and think, what the fuck are these going to do against an AK-47?
Yeah.
So you just had to take it and hope that the ship had outrun the skiffs being the little speedboat the pirates attacked on, or you had a high enough freeboard at the side to deter them, or the weather conditions. We used to move through the Mandeb Strait, which was the sort of really dodgy bit off kind of Sudan, I believe, and try and go through there at night. Your job as a team leader, I was a team leader with the anti-piracy, so I'd have to brief the captain. And you can imagine, this is what I talk about when it comes to taking orders from people. You'd have a captain. Some of them are really pompous. Foreign captains, Chinese, um, Singapore, Filipino. They just look at you and like, what do you know? Where some would go, that's a great idea in broken sort of English, and listen to your tactic. You're the security advisor on that vessel. You're telling them that the best time to go through that dodgy bit is at night, less chance of getting attacked. So yeah, interesting time. I got to travel, to some crazy places. I got stranded in Madagascar for 5 days. Ended up in a bar where I was the only white person. The guy on the door had an Uzi. That's a true story. And I was a bit like, okay. Obviously, after 5 or 6 pints, I didn't give a shit. But at the time, I was thinking, fuck. So yeah, some incredible experiences. Spent a lot of time in Sri Lanka. We had a villa out there that we kind of operate out of. Muscat. Yeah, all over Tanzania, all over really doing the anti-piracy. So for that side of things, I flew that much doing the anti-piracy that I end up as a silver member with Emirates. So I end up getting like upgrades to business class and stuff. So it was terrible. Terrible, Lewis.
And anti-piracy then, some security work before joining the fire service?
I did quite a bit of surveillance.
Surveillance.
Yeah, I did some surveillance. I did a bit of door work when I joined the fire service because I took about a 35 grand a year pay cut to be a firefighter. It was the job I always wanted to do since I was a kid, along with the military. Um, so yeah, I thought, right, I want to do it. And when the reality came about that I finally got the job in the fire service after 3 attempts, I like to do things in threes, Lewis. Over a 10-year period, I kind of actually um, realized that maybe I couldn't do it because I couldn't afford to do it. So I used to work a bit of door work in some of the local towns, some really rough towns as well. So I did a bit of door work, and then I started doing surveillance as well, for BBC Rogue Traders. Ever seen that
Yeah,
program?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I did for quite a few seasons through the springtime. I'd do all the background surveillance for the kind of news teams or the documentary teams that went in and busted all these dodgy cowboy builders and stuff. So I'd follow them around, get a pattern of life, which entrance they came in, what time they got to work, that sort of thing. So when the film crew went in to film, they knew exactly where they were going to be, or, thereabouts. So yeah, I did that for a bit. And then I landed the Gordon Ramsay job, which the people have heard that one so many times. Gordon Ramsay employed me to be a private investigator for him, and I followed his father-in-law around London for a couple of weeks. Got some really good snaps. And yeah, as a result, he won millions in court as off the back of my case. I've reached out to him to try and get him on the podcast, or at least get a free meal. But, no joy yet.
Well, you think at the very least he could do
Wait,
you a meal, right?
you know what I mean? My missus has a bit of a crush on him as well. It's weird. Don't ask me why. Must be the wrinkles. I think that might be what it was. But no, I'm not alleging that Gordon Ramsay has wrinkles just for the benefit of this. You can cut that bit out. But yeah, so it's all sorts of bits and bobs really to make ends meet. But yeah, got into the fire service 2013.
And that you're passionate about the fire service. That was, you mentioned that was something you'd always wanted to do.
Yeah, I kind of I like the idea. Like I say, inadvertently, and again, I'm just being honest. I like the idea of helping and kind of saving lives. And I talked about it earlier, actually, on a podcast that I did with Jim Davidson. I had Jim Davidson on today, the comedian, and I was chatting to him. We were talking about having a purpose. And every job I've done, you've got a purpose. And that's what I craved. So the purpose was to have an important job by my own standards, not by everyone else, just what I thought was important. And you were doing good on a day-to-day basis. You were going out, you were saving lives, you were making a difference. The same as the military, the anti-piracy. Don't get me wrong, the lure of the piracy in Iraq, there was an element of money in there. I'm not going to pretend there wasn't. But there was an element, you were protecting people, you were doing good, or at least that's the way I saw it and how I think. So yeah.
Yeah, that certainly seems to be the through line of this conversation and your story. And I suppose that sort of may bleed into the final big question I'm going to ask you, which I ask every guest that comes on the show, whether you are ex-military, whether you're a scientist, an actor, I ask the very same question. And that is, right now, for Chris Binch, what makes life worth living?
Being happy. Genuinely, I've spent periods or extended periods where I've not been happy. Now, whether that be in a job, in a career, in a relationship, and I've just kind of got my head down and thought, it'd be all right, and done that bit that we all do, and just go, it'd be all right. And what I've learned is that, and I live by these rules. I have a set of rules, and one of them is, if you're not happy in any aspect of your life, whether that's relationship, whether it's job, career, a hobby you're doing, or whatever it is, you take steps to change it. And again, without sounding corny, you're here for literally a split in time, a split second in time. So you've got to be happy doing what you do. And I became a little bit like, towards the end of the fire service, which I've only just recently left, was I got unhappy with it. And I've been unhappy with it for 3 or 4 years. Toxic management, all sorts of issues. I just fell out of love with it. It wasn't what it was when I joined sort of, 12 years ago. So yeah, it's just about making yourself happy at what all costs. And that can be by reaching out and talking to people if you're struggling as well. I'm a big advocate for that sort of thing.
Love it. So for everyone listening, watching right now, if they want to check out more from you, listen to your podcast, connect with you on social media, where's the best place we can send everyone to right now?
But YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, I'm on them all. I don't know how to use them all properly. TikTok, my 13-year-old girl has to show me how to use it, but I'm getting there. But I'm on all them platforms. It's the old Paratrooper podcast. There you go. Logos at the back there as well. And it's on the t-shirt. Yeah. And I do it to spread positivity, really, by just voicing. And thank you, Lewis, as well, for the same sketch. Obviously, I know you're not ex-military, but, and it's not always about kind of having veterans on that talk about mental health. It's just getting them stories out. How many kind of stories do we there where they've had a relative that's been in the military and they've never talked about it, and then they've took their stories to their grave. That's people's personal choice, but we are in a sort of modern world that we live in. We can get these stories out there, and I believe there are a lot out there that need to be heard. And the more they do it, the better. And, I'm not greedy and thinking, well, he shouldn't be doing it. I don't see podcasts can pop up and go, oh no, he's doing one as well. He's going to We have different audiences. We have different styles of doing things. There's 8.5 billion people on the planet. There's enough love to go around. And the more people that hear these stories and support veterans, and support men's mental health for general across the board, then it can only be a good thing, can't it?
Absolutely, man, and I'm a big fan of your YouTube channel. Some of the episodes you've done, I've really enjoyed. We've had a lot of mutual guests actually, so listeners of this show will know Jay Morton, Mark Billingham, all been on your podcast as well. So I encourage everyone to check that out, and I will link it below. So if everyone just clicks below, it'll take you to Chris's podcast, and you can find him there. But Chris, thank you so much. This hour's flown by. It's been an absolute pleasure, my friend.
No, pleasure's all mine. Thank you very much for inviting me on. I've really enjoyed it. Keep doing what you're doing, Lewis.